What's happening, everybody? Welcome into this Saturday edition of the Pack-A-Day podcast. Hope you are doing well. I hope you're healthy. I hope you're enjoying your weekend. But I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join me. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Andy Herman. I am a writer and editor for Packer Report, the owner of the Pack-A-Day podcast, and the guy who's doing this 365 days a year here on YouTube for the Pack-A-Day podcast as well. Again, appreciate you taking some time to join me. Got a few different topics that I want to discuss today, including some games this week that could affect the NFC playoff picture. I also want to go over some injury updates for both the Packers and the Eagles, and also want to take a very brief look back at the 2020 draft, and not necessarily to talk about Jordan Love or A.J. Dillon, anything, Josiah DeGuara. I know those picks are often discussed and how they're impacting or not impacting this current season. But that seems to be a very popular topic as of late. And it seems, once again, we are very divided as a community as to how we go about discussing this. And I just want to, get on my soapbox for a second and kind of go over where I stand on this topic. So there's the people that say, you know what? The draft was back in April and May. We don't know what's going to happen with Jordan Love. We don't know what's going to happen with A.J. Dillon. Those were picks for the future. The draft was way back in April. Let's focus on now. We're closer to next year's draft than we are to last year's draft. So why are we still going back and looking at this 2020 NFL draft? We're in the here and the now. This is an 8-3 football team. There's no reason to be discussing this last draft. It doesn't really have anything to do with the here and the now. And I understand that to an extent. There's also the other people who say, you know what? Jordan Love was a stupid pick, and A.J. Dillon was a stupid pick, and how can you not look at the current team and say, you know what, if you would have drafted a Chase Claypool or a Michael Pittman Jr., maybe some players you could have gotten in the second round, how could you not say, that this team could be a better team if you don't go out and draft some players and maybe they're 9-2 or 10-1, and maybe they even have a better chance of winning the Super Bowl? And again, seems to be there's two very wide ends of the spectrum. And of course, the answer is always somewhere in the middle. And I think first and foremost, the people that are saying, you know what, it's time to move on, stop looking at the 2020 draft. You don't know what's going to happen with Jordan Love and A.J. Dillon, and those are picks for the future. There's a lot of truth in that, right? And I thought Ty Dunn did a great job. If you haven't checked out his article yet, make sure to do it. He looks at it and says, hey, what the Packers did in this last draft could eventually be a blueprint for other teams. They could potentially go from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love and go back to back to back with great quarterbacks. Obviously, a lot of that's predicated on what happens with Jordan Love, and we don't know what's going to happen. But it was a pick for the future, and that is going to be something that we're going to have to see over time. And I thought Corey Behnke on Transplants this week did a great job of saying, you know what? People really struggle to live in the future. Everyone wants instant gratification. Everyone wants something here and now, and they can't really ever get their mind around the fact that, you know what? This is a present for you to unwrap later. Very similar to what we've seen out of Rashawn Gary and Darnell Savage this year. And I know we got to see Darnell Savage last year, but he wasn't fully ready. He wasn't fully functional. It takes some time for those players to develop. And in a way, Darnell Savage, Rashawn Gary, those picks last year, even Elton Jenkins to an extent, I know we got him last year as well, but those were picks for this season. And we're seeing the results of that now with Rashawn Gary, Darnell Savage, Elton Jenkins playing some really good football right now. Next year and the years beyond, that's going to be the time for Jordan Love, A.J. Dillon, and so on and so forth. Josiah DeGuara probably would have had an impact on this season had he not gotten hurt, but I still, maybe not what you'd ultimately like and expect from a top 100 pick. However, for the people saying, you know what, there's no point in looking back at the 2020 draft. It doesn't have anything to do with this season. I disagree with that as well. I think that's part of the fun point of being a fan, and it's part of the fun point of having these discussions and talking about it and things like that. Looking back at the process, what did Brian Gutekunst do? What other options were available? And looking at what they valued in players. And of course, valuing a quarterback makes a ton of sense, but a bruising power running back in round 2 is an interesting choice, as is an H-back in round 3. And it's not to say that any of those are ultimately bad selections. It's not to say that any can't help the team long term. But it was interesting nonetheless. And I think those conversations are always good to have. And I think it's always worthwhile to look back and see some of that draft philosophy and see how it could affect this team. And of course, how are you going to look at Brian Gutekunst and his potential draft philosophy moving forward if you don't look back and study some of the things that he did, some of the moves that he made, what he valued, and things like that as well? So I kind of disagree to an extent with both sides that say, you know what, we can't look back at it. Of course we should look back at it. Of course we should talk about it. It's for those of you who are wrestling fans, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. The best part about being a wrestling fan is doing the fantasy booking and talking about, who would be a fun matchup against each other. And this is what I would do if I were booking the matchups. It's the same. It's why people love fantasy football. It's why people love having conversations. It's why so many of these Packers podcasts, whether it's on Cheesehead TV, whether it's Packs What She Said, whether it's on Packer Report, whether it's on, all the different sites that you can get Packer information from, it's why all of them are wildly popular because people love talking about this stuff. So I think it's a good topic. I think it's a fair topic. I do think to some extent you have to move on and not complain about the Jordan Love pick, at this point, and you have to let that play out a little bit. We simply don't know what that's going to be. And if he does pan out, you're never going to go back and say, well, what if they did something a little bit different? So I think, again, I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm not telling you how to be a fan, but I just think that, these things are fun to discuss. They're fun to talk about. That's part of being a fan. But at the same token, let's kind of wait and see with Jordan Love, and let's see what he brings down the line before we really evaluate this last year's draft and all of a sudden jump to the conclusions that Jordan Love and A.J. Dillon were dumb picks. A.J. Dillon could easily be the starting running back next year. Jordan Love could be the future of this franchise. So let's just give it a hot second to see how these things turn out, but still discuss them because it's fun to discuss. All right, that's way longer than I wanted to go on that, but I hope that made a little bit of sense. Let's quickly go over some of the injury updates. Let's start with the Philadelphia Eagles. Rudy Ford is listed as out. Darius Slay is listed as questionable. And then really the big news, Fletcher Cox, who did not practice over the course of the last couple days, was practiced in a limited fashion on Friday and is no longer on the injury report. He is good to go. He is going to play. So that is a really big win for the Philadelphia Eagles, especially with Corey Linsley out. Spoiler, I'll get to that in just a second. But that is a very big win for the Eagles. Their defensive front is going to be intact. That is a very strong group, and the Packers will have one of their biggest tests up front this season, not just because of Fletcher Cox, because of that entire defensive front. So that's a big win for the Eagles. Rudy Ford isn't going to affect the game that much. Darius Slay, really interesting. He was limited on Friday. I have to say that my guess is he's going to play. But if he's even a little bit banged up going against Davante Adams, that could have an effect. So we'll see what type of shape Darius Slay is in. I'm sure Green Bay will be testing him with Davante Adams a little bit. Really just struggled against DK Metcalf, but of course DK Metcalf is different than most wide receivers in the league. So we'll see what Darius Slay's got this week, but he's probably the one player on the injury report for the Eagles that, as Saturday and Sunday roll along and inactives come out, that's a player that you want to keep an eye on. For the Packers, I think it's first worth noting that A.J. Dillon's still not off the COVID list. I think I get messages every week of why isn't A.J. Dillon in the game? He's still on the COVID list. So he's not active yet. They theoretically could still make him active on Saturday. I don't know that that's going to happen. We'll see. There's been no whispers or rumblings about anything like that. So I wouldn't expect it, but something to keep an eye out for on Saturday. But as of right now, A.J. Dillon's still on the COVID list and out for this game. Corey Linsley also was ruled out, and he will not be playing. Probably going to be a couple weeks before we even start talking about Corey Linsley being able to potentially play, but certainly going to be out this week. My expectation would be John Runyon left guard, Elton Jenkins center, Lucas Patrick right guard. They do have a couple different options where they could go. They could keep Jenkins at left guard, move Patrick to center. They could put Turner at right guard and Wagner at right tackle. So they've got some options there. It'll be interesting to see what direction that they go in, but I would expect they kind of start with the way they ended last week. Save for it looks like Lucas Patrick is going to be available to go. He is not on the injury list, so that's great news for the Packers. Then two questionable players that we know are questionable. That's Chris Barnes and Tyler Ervin. Both were limited all week. Tyler Ervin, of course, has been out recently. It'll be interesting to see if he's able to go, especially now that Tavon Austin is in there. We'll see if maybe they give Ervin another week to get fully healthy. They've been cautious in these situations, but that's one to keep an eye on. Then Chris Barnes, another one, after coming off the COVID list, still listed as questionable with an injury. So he was limited all week long. Again, somebody that Green Bay could be a little bit more cautious with. We'll see. I think those two are true questionables. And then Zadaria Smith, also listed as questionable. at first glance, it looks a little bit scary because he practiced in full on Wednesday, then was limited on Thursday, and then didn't practice on Friday. And it seems like things were going completely in the wrong direction. But Matt LaFleur made mention in his press conference on Friday that he was hopeful that Zadaria Smith was going to be able to go. So it sounds like he's going to be okay. But it sounds like he did re-aggravate an injury from earlier this season. He hasn't been fully, himself this year. I think everyone kind of knows that. Still playing okay. Certainly better than average, but nowhere near where he was a season ago. And you hate to see him kind of have those lingering injury issues. So we'll see what he's capable of doing, but it sounds like he's going to be able to play. We'll see if maybe he gets a little bit of a lower snap count this week against Philadelphia. Quickly, some matchups that I think are worth watching outside of the Packer game this week. You've got Saints-Falcons. I think this is really the interesting one. The Falcons have won 3 of their last 4 games and 4 of their last 6. I think the big thing here to watch for is Julio Jones going to be able to play? It's in Atlanta. New Orleans hasn't lost since their loss to Green Bay. I just think that could be a game with Matt Ryan and that Falcons offense and really their whole team playing better against a New Orleans team without Drew Brees. Taysom Hill will be starting. Can the Falcons pull off a win, maybe help out the Packers a little bit, help them maybe improve their seed a little bit? That's going to be one to keep an eye on. Rams-Cardinals, as of this point, it won't really affect Green Bay, but it certainly is going to affect that NFC playoff seeding and certainly what could happen in the NFC West. And frankly, it's just a really good football game. So another one to keep an eye on. And then Giants-Seahawks, obviously it's going to be important for not only NFC East race, where the Giants are still very much in the discussion there, but for the Seahawks as well. But with Daniel Jones doubtful and likely, not playing in this game, it looks like it's going to be Colt McCoy versus the Seahawks. Seahawks should win this one relatively easily. The Giants defense is playing really good football and is probably the best group in the NFC East, whether it's offense or defense. I think the Giants defense might be the best. Washington's front 4 can certainly make some noise too, but I really like the way that the Giants defense is playing right now. So that'll be a game to keep an eye on and probably cheering a little bit for the Giants in that game as well. That's going to do it for me. I'll be right back here tomorrow with my kind of keys to the game as well as my preview of Packers and Eagles. I hope you enjoy your weekend. Make sure to check out the episode tomorrow. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and make sure to check out today's Pack-A-Day podcast wherever you get your favorite podcast. It's going to do it for me. I'll see you tomorrow. Until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.